Hey everyone, welcome to this week's release of the Hash Rate Happy Hour podcast. On today's show, my guest is Steve Barbour. Steve has years of experience in the oil and gas industry, as well as the Bitcoin mining industry, with a formal education as an engineer, and he is the CEO and founder of Upstream Data. Steve's company is an oil and gas services company that specializes in integrating Bitcoin mining operations at oil and gas sites to help increase overall efficiencies. Their goal is to help pair modular Bitcoin mining data centers to natural gas and oil operations to convert waste gas into useful work that can be monetized. On today's show, Steve and I will talk through how Upstream Data is one of the pioneers in building and supplying portable load centers directly to the source of generation at oil and gas production sites, how oil and gas companies are viewing this unique way to monetize their otherwise excess gas on their sites, and how Bitcoin mining is naturally moving farther and farther upstream towards the point of energy generation. For me personally, this was an incredibly educational and insightful conversation about how Bitcoin mining is finding itself more and more embedded in the oil and gas industry. So, with that, I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Steve Barbour. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Like I said in the introduction, I'm here with Steve Barbour at Upstream Data. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Appreciate it.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation today. I think what I'd really like to do, Steve, to kick this off is dive a little bit into your background. And I'd love for you to touch on how you went from, kind of an old traditional industry, oil and gas, and went from there to Bitcoin mining.
Well, certainly relative to Bitcoin mining, it's an old traditional industry, but in the scope of human civilization, it's quite new and exciting. This oil field stuff, uh, and it's really hard for people to understand unless you're in it and you see the pace of innovation. But yeah, I mean, I am by trade a mechanical engineer. That's my schooling. And I started working in the oil patch as a student at the start, but I mean professionally, like my first outside of school job was 2011, and I working for oil companies. Basically, my job was to, and what became, I would say, more than a job is more passion. I really enjoy it. Is helping the oil company optimize production. So, like, I was a production engineer and did some facilities engineering as well. So in that role, like in that first gig at that oil company, so that was like what got me into the energy industry was, Alberta's and Saskatchewan's oil and gas industry. That's how I started, and yeah, and then turned that knowledge and skill set into, once I learned about Bitcoin, I guess in 2016, turned that knowledge and the passion I had for I would say I would even say it was uncharacteristic passion. Like I'm a little bit of a psycho in terms of like just spending all my after hours uh, trying to trying to create stuff in the oil pat in like tools and stuff in the oil industry, and that passion just fed over into Bitcoin. I just became the obsession I had for oil and gas production, which still persists. Basically, just uh, came over to Bitcoin mining when I when I learned about that. So yeah, now I'm really I got a foot in both worlds. I got an oil and gas services business, Upstream Data. We focus on Bitcoin mining, as most of the world knows. The most of the world that know us knows that. But we also do oil and gas services as well, oil field services. So I'm pretty focused on growing that business as well as the Bitcoin mining side of things.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so looking at that, like you just touched on that optimizing of production, did that have a lot to do with upstream data and what you guys are trying to do with your customers?
It's actually our core business is really optimizing production still. Although we have branched out into non-oil field Bitcoin mining projects, but our products, like all of our products that we've developed for oil field Bitcoin mining, we have we call it a hash generator, for example. It's a generator, it's a natural gas generator with a Bitcoin mine attached to it. So we are the first in the world to put that kind of product out there, and that was actually my first ever product back in 2017. And it's developed over the years. It's changed a lot. We've had many iterations, but the point of that product was to attach to oil wells, not gas wells. Actually, it was primarily meant for oil wells that had associated gas, and it just took up that excess gas volume that they couldn't use for fuel or sell into a pipeline, and basically unload what is normally rate limited. So, like the oil well is rate limited on production in many cases because of the emissions of the vented or flared natural gas. So, the point of the product was to, and what we still get for most of our deployments on that product is because we do sell it into just pure gas plays as well, like people that are mining Bitcoin on stranded gas. But the purpose of the product, the original intent, was to tie it into these associated gas streams that are being wasted, and then to turn that into Bitcoin. And so the entire system and even the controller was designed to modulate the Bitcoin mine, like the hash rate, like the clocking, and the how many servers, how many miners are engaged, loaded on the engine, and basically we engage the mining load. I just call it, the computational load on the engine,
Hmm.
in response to what the engine can do, which is a function of what it's doing already. Like, so for example, I'm probably already going way too in the weeds, but
No, I
you know,
love it.
for
Keep going.
for example, like a lot of oil and gas facilities are powered by engines. So we like our systems are designed to pair with those engines and take up all the surplus capacity that the engine has. Because most oil and gas wells, the engine is oversized to run the facility. And so when you have a waste gas stream that's being burned or vented, and you have an engine sitting there already and it's not being utilized to full capacity, well, it makes a hell of a lot of sense to drop in, what we call a load center, a Bitcoin mining load center, to that generator and take up all the excess. It's the same kind of story you hear broadly in the Bitcoin mining industry right now with like grid. They just loosely call it like grid balancing, load balancing on grids, um, through frequency response mechanisms and other
Hmm.
such things. Um, it gets a lot of hype in the grid industry, but we've been really utilizing this tech since 2017 for natural gas capture.
It's fascinating. I just candidly, I don't have a lot of exposure to the oil and gas industry, and especially this piece of it. So I am super fascinated by all of that. So you mentioned that they have an oversized engine on site already, and is that already tied into the natural gas that's there then?
Yeah,
And so this is really an easy tie into their operation.
yeah, it's actually a no-brainer in a lot of cases, but for a lot of oil companies, they still have to think hard about doing it, even when it's just like clearly a big win, just because the perception they might have around Bitcoin, but also the risks, like the real, very real risks, like handling coins and all that stuff. And it's sort of not primary to their business, but yeah, I mean, it's sort of like there's a variety of applications, but there's the original target application, which we still are very successful in getting deployments, is when you have that sunk capital in a generator that's on your facility already. It's already powering your facility, and really it's analogous to exactly what's happening on the grid with Bitcoin mining at industrial scale. You have a lot of cases where you have baseload generators, thermal generators, or even like on the renewable side, you have overbuilt, obviously because it's unreliable, you have overbuilt facilities on wind and solar, and you can have if effectively curtailment of that power. So it's the same thing in oil field, but on a micro scale. It's a microgrid, and you have a generator providing base power to the facility, but the facility's requirements fluctuate. They don't always need a steady load. It can be weather dependent. It can just be. It's usually just production dependent, like what's happening downhole. But you can have a well even start at high rates and decline, and the bottom hole pressure declines. Um, and that you can have different things like if the rates decline, you have different power output requirements from the engine, and all of a sudden you might have either more or less power required by that engine at any given time. And so the whole Bitcoin mining thing and the computational load response aspect of it is awesome because it just can spool up or spool down in response to what's available on the fuel side, but also available on the capacity side of the generator. And so we effectively build microgrids. They're not connected to anything off-site, but we build that for the oil company, and it's the real cool thing, of course, as you know and your listeners know. It's just the whole it's sort of mind blowing with this whole Bitcoin mining technology being a portable demand on energy, right? So
Hmm.
it really just shifts the it basically cuts out the middlemen of energy distribution in a lot of ways, which is why I think we see a lot of FUD around it and resistance from some of the middlemen in the industry, like in the energy markets, not embracing Bitcoin mining because it sort of cuts them out. And if you think about it from like a upstream oil and gas company, you're usually getting bent over by the midstream companies on rates, on what you get paid and your fees, and you get locked into these nasty contracts. And you know it's not always certainly one-sided, but it's not often a great deal for the oil producer to sell their gas. And we come in and we're like a virtual midstream company, and we just can work with them to sell their gas to a different market than the local gas takeaway market. And sometimes that's better for them. They make more money. Sometimes it's worse. It just depends on market conditions. So overall, it's definitely I think we're all seeing it in anyone paying attention to Bitcoin mining. We're seeing quite a rapid adoption and industrialization to a variety of sources of power. It's moving upstream towards the generation.
Oh, absolutely. So what I'd love to maybe pick apart a little bit. So I like like you mentioned, I mean, the benefits here are so obvious. And I think, we probably live in that side of the coin, quite a bit. If you are hearing pushback from any of these guys, what does that look like? Are some of these guys pushing back on this? Some of these oil and gas operators, and if they are, what are you hearing?
I wouldn't say like we get pushback, I guess you could say, from the producers. Not so much on it's for them, like we're basically we're being a service company, we're there to pitch them on what we build and sell it to them, sell them some kind of service, right, to help them make more money. I mean, that's what we do, and that's what any service business does. And so in that approach, like when we're pitching them on buying a Bitcoin mine, there's oil companies that want to buy everything and own it all and mine their
Hmm.
own Bitcoin. We've been quite successful setting up a lot of oil companies mining their own Bitcoin. But when you talk to the bigger companies in the space, like ExxonMobil now, they're known. It sort of leaked last year that they're mining Bitcoin. Now they're not actually mining Bitcoin; it's a third party. But in normally what you see from these big companies, uh, presently and likely into the near future at least, the most of them aren't going to want to self mine Bitcoin. They might create a subsidiary or something to do that. But what they want and what they are willing to do is like other things like will obviously sell their gas to Bitcoin miners. That's the easiest thing, and they take almost no risk. Um, we don't usually work with oil companies on that kind of model, but we do other models like where they buy generators, for example, from us or provide their own generator, and then we'll pay for power, or we'll help our customers get set up with that oil company and pay for power. And so like the pushback that we get from oil companies directly isn't so much like they're not it's not so much any worry on the tech. It's more of a risk thing. They don't want to take the risk on certainly on the computer, on the asset like the servers, the miners,
Hmm.
or the Bitcoin. They often don't want to touch it. And we actually provide a service for them so they never have to touch it in cases where they do own the hardware. We basically white glove it for them so we can just send them a check in fiat every month based on what they mined. But so we have simple agreements like that with a lot of oil companies. Um, I think the pushback though, you certainly get a lot of obviously. We've all heard of lots of politicians pushing back on it.
Hmm.
We've heard regulatory bodies pushing back on it, including in the oil field. There's been, I can name a few jurisdictions that have not been friendly to Bitcoin mining. Um, Sometimes it's like emissions related. They think they haven't really, or they won't admit that it's actually reducing emissions, and so they still slap penalties on, like for example, Canada. The Canada, at least it might change this year, but they've been charging a carbon tax on stationary power generation in the oil field, even though that the power generation has a net carbon reduction. It's just it's a stupid way of accounting that they're doing, a completely misaligned system that's broken. And so they've, whether it's by design or just by, I would say more so incompetency, like typical regulatory body, like not enforcing rules, um, like in a properly synergistic way with industry, and they've created bottlenecks and problems, and basically have stymied, say like they've stifled the pace of innovation and deployment in places like Canada for that reason. I know of a lot of people that have not invested in Bitcoin mines because they're too worried about the carbon tax implications, even though they're reducing carbon emissions. It's just fucked up. So,
That's
excuse my language.
no, no, no. That's
Yeah.
fine. That's crazy.
So
That's
that's like, I guess like, long answer short, like there is pushback, not normally from our customer targets. It's their only pushback is usually like balance of risk. Like is this worth the money to them? And you often get like, the common feedback we'll get is like, well, we could spend our money on drilling more oil and make better returns than like Bitcoin mining. Very valid statement, but usually we have to just respond to them. Well, we're not really competing with your drilling budget. We're competing with your gas egress budget, and nothing really compares to Bitcoin mining from a payback standpoint relative to any other gas egress options, at least in the last decade in the oil and gas industry, because gas prices have been absolutely garbage, and they're trending back towards garbage right now. So,
yeah,
so
yeah.
that's a nice part of Bitcoin, the whole Bitcoin thing.
Sure. Yeah, it's and I mean, I'm sure, you get some of the guys in the mix that are, well, we could just go put our cash into buying Bitcoin. I mean, you hear all sorts of things. I think it's
Yeah.
just really you have to work with the customer to figure out, how is this add-on to the business going to be beneficial for them, and if it makes sense, then you move forward. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So your company name, the name of the company is Upstream. I'd love to maybe hear your thoughts on how Bitcoin is moving up the stream. How is Bitcoin moving upstream? Why is it moving upstream? Um, Maybe just some of your thoughts around just the natural path towards the point of generation or production, um, and why that's happening.
Yeah. I mean, my company, the root of the company name was Upstream Oil and Gas and Data Centers. That's what really triggered Upstream Data. That and I have other aspirations of basically automation or remote management of oil and gas facilities. So I thought it was an appropriate name. I also didn't want to affiliate directly with Bitcoin because I always think it's a little silly. I think sort of more broad names are better and for the long run. But anyway, yeah. So I mean, the concept of mining moving upstream in the like energy infrastructure. I mean, you can sort of look at really energy systems are extremely simple. They're of course made up of a lot of complex components. Like there's all kinds of switchgear and a different, even a lot of stuff I have no idea about. I'm not an electrical engineer, but like different parts of the system that are rather quite complex. But really, what we're talking about in any energy system, it boils down to generation, generating electricity, then transmission and distribution of that to a load, which is your demand on the energy. So it's really, you can almost say there's only really three components: generation, distribution, and consumption. Um, or you could say there's a fourth, like which is the potential energy, like the fuel source, like whether it's wind or coal or whatever it
Sure.
might be. And I mean, when you look at that system as just a simple system, the grid is that it just has a lot of different generation feeding a lot of different distribution, feeding a lot of different loads, like a lot of different consumers. And that's where the complexity comes in. And that's why, managing grid infrastructure is not so easy as, I'd make it out to seem. And what we do professionally is microgrids. Like I've built literally the most simplistic microgrid for a Bitcoin mine possible. It's a generator and a Bitcoin mine all in one skid, like one little package. Like it's generation, distribution, and load all in one package. And so you don't get simpler than that. That's as simple as it possibly can become. But thinking about it in simple terms is useful. And I find that when you look at that product, for example, what I call a hash generator, um, that's as upstream as it gets in the energy supply chain of that generation down through distribution to load.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the grid, and traditionally where Bitcoin mining has started on the grid, well, it started where? At home, effectively, right? With Satoshi on his laptop, right? It's like there's been articles written about what even laptop he was using based on, they could sort of infer the CPU cycles and stuff. And, there's some cool stuff there, but it looks like he started on a laptop. The industry took off, and home mining sort of had a micro boom before it went sort of slowly industrialized. But even in the industrialization of it, if you look from, Bitcoin Genesis in 2009, which was purely home mining, then over the next couple of years, people started, developing bigger rigs, like whether they're GPU rigs or FPGAs
Yep.
or the first Bitcoin ASICs, which were in like 2012, 2013 timeframe. That transitioned towards industrial, but even then, they were very, I call it downstream on the grid. They're in warehouses. They're in slightly better. And I mean, back then, the economics of Bitcoin mining wasn't so. It didn't really matter what your power price was. It was more so getting hash rate online and keeping your capex down. The capital costs on these computers back then were so high that power wasn't so important in terms of your rate. But that, transition, and now power is basically the driving factor, like your energy rate,
Mm-hmm.
as it's sort of matured and commoditized. But everything started downstream, and then it slowly, you see case by case it move further upstream in this distribution system. Like you get guys to get a competitive advantage, they go pair up with a substation and cut out all the downstream distribution. Now we're seeing big companies move, like it's what's the company, Talon Energy. There's a few, like Stronghold Digital has a coal plant. They have mining basically at the coal plant.
Mm-hmm.
I know in oil and gas, like call it off-grid oil and gas, like stuff not feeding the grid, like electrical grids, because you do have that in the oil field too. You have power plants in oil production zones like feeding grids. But in the off-grid stuff, I've known for years of companies have adopting, our technology that we build, like for example, but and building their own stuff, like at midstream power plants. So I mean, the trend is sort of like you were saying, like the trend is upstream in energy infrastructure towards a generator. And that's where, to me, it makes sense because when you have a technology like Bitcoin, which is really the only scalable, uh, it's the only scalable load, demand on energy, um, any load that's willing to pay for energy that you can put anywhere. Like you can certainly do that for other computing systems, but I would say they're not so scalable. Whereas Bitcoin mining is ultra scalable. You just add more servers. You have no counterparty. You have no like third party. Like if you're a like a traditional data center, and you're serving like Amazon's back end, like they're your
Mm-hmm.
customer, and they have certain restrictions and requirements on how their data centers are, the reliability and the like. And Bitcoin mining doesn't have that. So you have basically unrestrained scalability. It's effectively linear scalability, that can go right at the power source. And so you don't need to pay the middleman, midstreamer guy, the guy who's like, if it's oil and gas, you don't have to you don't need to work with any midstreamers. You just work direct with the upstream guy. In the grid, you don't need to work through any, um, now, of course, there's regulation that make this not possible in some areas, but any areas where you have private generators, like private companies generating power, you don't need to work with the downstream guy who is paying for their power. You just cut them out. You build the Bitcoin mine right at their plant, and anything, if the grid doesn't pay them enough, then they just send it to the Bitcoin mine, and it's really rather amazing. And I think we haven't barely scratched the surface of what the politics we're going to see that play out on, as more and more generators do this. Because I know if I was a private generator and I could make more money mining Bitcoin, I wouldn't sell any to the grid. I mean, why would you? The grid's going to have to pay more to compete with miners. But of course, miners are capturing the lowest hanging fruit, which is the waste energy right now. So that is not really, you could say, non-competitive with current grid users.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating. I mean, the electrical side is definitely more hit or miss than the oil and gas industry. I feel like when it comes to looking at this type of move upstream, I just as an example, there is a small municipal power company in Minnesota that has a decent sized Bitcoin mining facility at it, but they're sourcing their power. They're not a generation and transmission type utility company. So, I mean, it's built at a substation in the middle, which is interesting. So, I mean, it's still kind of working its way upstream and getting closer, and they're working on it. And then, I've heard that there is legislation. Well, last year there was talk about legislation for some tax incentives specifically for Bitcoin mining out in the Dakotas. I know North Dakota actually has that in place, I believe. So they're working on it,
North
trying to make
Dakota
it
is
more.
quite, yeah, they're quite pro Bitcoin mining. Minn Kota is one of, I think I don't know if it's one of or the authority there. I forget now. I met with them a while back. I don't really quite I'm not from there, but we have customers in North Dakota, and they're very pro. Like they've been very great at facilitating our customer success. Been really amazing, actually. So yeah, I like to see. I guess you call it the Midwest, U.S. I don't know. I'm
Yep.
Canadian. Okay, so I like to see those areas though, like adopt it, and it's really good to see. And when you mentioned that substation, in Minnesota somewhere is, the maybe the municipal power entity is doing that. That's awesome. And but you look at it and like, it's certainly, that's where most, I think, grid mining is right now. It's sort of on kinds of deals like that. But you sort of got to wonder, like, because the built into the power price, they're basically paying whoever's supplying them the electricity, is that overhead and cost and maintenance on the distribution and transmission. And you can argue, and there's certainly reasons why there always be probably a need for, there will always be, in my opinion, a need for this, like, call it downstream mining, and a demand for it. There's a lot of really nice aspects of it that get more complicated the further upstream you go, such
Yeah.
as execution of the project. Like it's quite easy to execute, you know, one Bitcoin mine off a substation than it is like, like a bunch of little ones on all the power plants feeding that substation. It's a lot of things like that that play into you know, the economics of just doing it further downstream. But I do think it'll just keep trending the way it has been.
We'll be right back after this message from our sponsor. Support for this episode comes from Sunnyside Digital. Are you ready for the next Bitcoin bull run? Get ahead of the game by building out your Bitcoin mining infrastructure now. Sunnyside Digital is your one-stop shop for everything Bitcoin mining, from transformers and switchgear to racks and miners. With a white glove approach to understanding your needs, they'll provide you with the hardware you need at the most competitive pricing possible. Say goodbye to your sourcing headaches and say hello to Sunnyside Digital. Contact their sales team today at sunnysideinc.ca or via email at bwalsh@sunnysideinc.ca. All right, now back to the show. Yeah, from your perspective, as that trend keeps happening, and maybe more specifically in the oil and gas, do you think you'll see more of the business model of self mining it? So companies, really picking this up, adopting it, understanding how to hold and sell Bitcoin, or do you think you'll see more of like a hosting and or like you touched on earlier, more of like a partnership for, just someone coming in and paying for the gas?
I think the end game, the intermediate game, like the where we're in at now, like we're sort of still in the early industrialized, call it maturity of the market. Like we're still early.
Hmm.
Um, the end game to me is very clear that it will be um, the generators, whoever owns the generation, will mine the Bitcoin. They might always, like for quite a while anyway, I could see it being something that they offload to a third party, like they do a hosting contract and sell power. I do see that in the near term is likely the start of when more generators, and I'm talking any generation, not just like what's commonly talked about, like wind and solar, but like coal plants, natural gas plants, peaker plants, baseload plants, nuclear plants. Like I think it's Talon Energy, who has a nuclear facility right now that they just built like 200 megawatts of Bitcoin mining load.
Oh
And
wow.
I don't know if it's through a subsidiary or a third party, maybe, arm's length, if they're just selling power to this entity like a third party, or if they're actually, the shareholders in that power plant are actually self mining. I'm not sure. In the end, it doesn't really matter. It's more of really a share of risk. So uh, as a group, they're mining Bitcoin, and there might be different shareholders, different entities based on risk profile. But at the end of the day, it's the same thing. And from a like mechanically or electrically or from an engineering perspective, like having it at the plant or as close to the plant as makes sense from a facility standpoint is exactly how you want it, because that's the minimal. You're never losing power in heat loss and transmission, like down through miles and miles of cable and
Hmm.
transformation of power. And so it's the most efficient from just call it a mechanical standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, and that's where I see it continuing to go. So it's really cool to see that, and I don't know how long it'll take until more and more of these especially private generators. Public's a different story, right? Like when it's a public utility, which I think in several jurisdictions in the U.S. the authority is more of a, like, all generation through distribution is all owned publicly by the state or by some like regulated entity. But at least for private markets, which they exist throughout the U.S., like any private generating
Hmm.
station, I could see them all getting into it in a very short amount of time. And it's part of our company goal actually is to build and sell facilities to these generating stations. Our products fit there, like it's sort of built, purpose built for that. It's just mainly oil field right now that's adopting it. But we have like big designs that we're hoping to target actual big power plants And we would be a supplier, not the miner. The
Hmm.
miner might be them, or it might be a third party. That in the end we end up being a service partner too. But it's certainly happening already, and it's going to keep happening. I mean, the thing that holds a lot of these guys back, like whether it's oil companies or I can imagine like private owners of private generating stations, say like a peaker plant or a you know coal baseload power plant, like
Yeah.
whatever it might be. A lot of what holds them back is the cost. It's just simply the cost. The cost of the mining machines is rather high. So, we've seen that cost trend down though, like and on a cost per kilowatt basis. Just the cost of the installed capacity.
Yeah.
So if that keeps trending down, which it inevitably will, as electronics do, um, it's going to become a lot more appetizing for them. The margins might be tighter, and it sort of implies that they will be tighter as costs come down. But and there's more ASICs sitting on shelves, like there's more mining hardware idle. But it'll become like I sort of feel like it'll actually just incentivize, and we sort of see this with the oil companies, even in this bear market. Oil companies that wouldn't touch the investment, even though it made a lot more gross revenue a year ago. They like the fact that the computer prices have come down like 10x or whatever it was, like
Yeah.
compared to those prices. So there's a lot of really good things happening that shifting, continuing the narrative that mining is such an awesome thing for energy systems. And if you even like any listener that doesn't, well, I doubt you'll have any listeners that don't like Bitcoin, but like if you disassociate any perceptions you have of Bitcoin and just think about the energy side of it, there's really not a lot of ways you can knock it. Like it's really an incredible technology. You might knock how someone applies it. You might say you don't like me because I set natural gas companies up to make more natural gas. Some people don't like that. They think, oh, it's bad for the environment or whatever you want to think. But in the end, on it, if you just look at the energy system as that simple system I described, like it's only a good thing. So
Oh, absolutely. And you touched on another piece I'm actually wildly fascinated on. We don't have to spend a ton of time on it, but you mentioned the kind of the commoditization of the ASICs, the Bitcoin miners. it's
yeah,
it's a hotly debated topic right now. You hear a lot of people who want to tell you that the prices are going to just keep following Bitcoin price in lockstep, and it's just I definitely think that that is trending down, but you got a lot of people that
yeah, yeah. It is. I mean, it naturally you think it would, because, like for example, I mean, you can see clearly on public data that the efficiency of these chips, the rate of improvement over prior generations has slowed, right? So like, simply put, like when you would have a new piece of hardware come out twice as efficient in 2 months that was happening early days. Now you're getting a new piece of hardware that's twice as efficient as next best in 2 years, like 2 to 3 years, and that's going to keep expanding, right? So that time frame between like say step change efficiency is expanding, and of course that's clear. I mean, just look at the data; it's a proof in the it's proof in the trend, and so that would of course just simply imply that as more machines are produced, their marginal benefit over prior generations is going to be less and less, which means that these prior generation machines are going to last longer. Like if they're mechanically reliable, like if they're not breaking, they're going to
yeah,
be economically viable for longer. And even when they're not, like say what we saw in this last bull market, like we just need to remember these S9 machines were as low as $20, right? A pop, $15 less if you bought a huge quantity, right?
or free.
Free. And but then all of a sudden the market flips, and they're where had no margins on a base power cost, they all of a sudden were making really good money and like were paying out to the owners very very quickly. And so we're only going to see more of that. Like and we were talking like new gen, say an S19. The first versions of that were 3 times as efficient as an S9, and we saw those S9s come back to life. Well, the XPs versus the first gen like S19 Pros, J Pros or something, the XPs are quite a bit more efficient, but not that much. So you're just going to see, like, I think at my company, like, we're sort of done with S9s, not because of, I don't think they aren't going to come back in value. I actually think they still will. The reliability is just getting bad because they're not being made anymore.
Yeah.
So that's more of our concern with it. And compared to the, which is on topic, like the reliability of the machine, as that gets better, and the machines don't actually like depreciate physically, and they can actually just stay online for 10 years straight, and you have minimal maintenance. As that gets better and better, and not just the actual uptime for its like mechanical failure or whatever, but uptime based on environmental conditions, like if you're in a really bad climate with a lot of humidity or something, and you get premature failures from maybe shorts or whatever it might be, or you hear about people mining by the ocean and they get corrosive salty air come into
Yep.
their hash boards. As the machines get better and better made, like better built, better quality, because that's what the manufacturers are going to have to differentiate on in the future. Because when you got like one guy's got a chip at X and the next guy's got a chip that's like 1.05x on efficiency, like just a 5% difference or something. Like, no, it doesn't really matter. Like the cost, the price and the reliability become more important. So I'm excited for that because if you think about it, the rapid change in the computer hardware and its efficiency change and the obsolescence of prior generation has actually really stifled the adoption by non-hardcore Bitcoiners, like
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like a power company. They don't want to go reinvest in a whole nother fleet in 2 to 3 years. They would like to hold that investment for 10 years. That would be nice, and not have to upgrade everything. So I just think it's like we're on this amazing trend towards this complete, uh, like across the globe, every energy system at any industrial scale is going to be integrating it. And if they don't, then other users of their system are going to do it because
Yep.
they're just going to play some arbitrage play. So
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, the innovation around the computers themselves, it that's a whole nother, like, I'm very fascinated by Bitcoin mining with energy producers, but then also on the just the innovation in the actual computer itself. I'm wildly fascinated by it. So actually, to kind of switch gears back to the Bitcoin mining aspect of it, and kind of on the same topic of innovation, what are some of the other efficiencies that you see or that you may have identified that Bitcoin mining can come in and help? So, just as an example of that, like heat recapture is another innovative area that Bitcoin mining can step in. And I don't have the data off the top of my head, but the amount of power needed for all the heat, especially here in the Midwest, up in Canada, we need a lot of heat through the winter months.
yeah, yeah,
Are there other areas like that that you guys have identified or that you're excited about?
yeah. I mean, stuff like I wouldn't say like our company formally is identified or but like me personally in the industry, I enjoyed chatting about and stuff, but and talking about, but or writing about or tweeting about or something. But I'm actually not a big bull on the heat recovery stuff. Not as big as you see. Like you see a lot of Bitcoiners that are really excited about it. And I've always had the same sort of position. My position hasn't really changed even after seeing some pretty cool products and projects come to light. And you can see it in what we do as a business. Like we designed this black box product, and it actually caught sort of fire in the bull market, in terms of like I think a lot of people know what it is, like in the Bitcoin mining industry. It got a lot of recognition, or like got a lot of tweets. I don't know what you want to call it.
Yeah.
So at least on the Bitcoin Twitter industry, like part of the world, like it was well known, but like people were like, well, why don't you reuse the heat? Because I designed the black box to not use heat, like not reuse heat. I said there's a big market for people that want to mine at home, but don't want to deal with the noise and the heat. So
Yep.
I'll build you a box that lets you stick it outside, right? That's what it does. But then a lot of our customers ended up sticking it inside or plumbing it inside so they could reuse the heat. And why not? Like if you can reuse the heat, you should. If you're already going to be mining, you're just offsetting some of their cost. From the, I am excited about the heat reuse thing, like in a way. I think water cooling, the new water cooling technology that's been developed for Bitcoin mining, is probably the best way to utilize heat. Immersion
Okay.
is another way, but because you got air cooling, you got immersion cooling, you got water cooling. Immersion and water more or less different different in their systems, but they're both really good at uh, giving you the ability to exchange the heat, right? So there's definitely some cool applications of it. I mean, we've sent black boxes to, so air cooled mines, to greenhouses, and they're using it in a greenhouse. Um, Anywhere you're using electric heating, you should be mining Bitcoin. Like that's like
Yeah.
simple. There's going to be cases where you just need. It's not going to make sense because you need like higher, resistive heaters operate at much higher temperatures, and okay, like you're going to have some scenarios where it doesn't make sense. But if you're like heating your home and you're in, I don't know, Quebec, and you're paying hydro to heat your home through electric heat, you should really think about
Yeah.
undoing that electrical resistance system, and maybe figuring out how to blow mining heat through your house. That's a no brainer because you were talking electric heat, right?
Yep.
But now if you're in Alberta like I am, and I can go plug my black box in and plumb it into my furnace or something and recover some heat throughout the house. But I'm currently heating my house in my boiler on natural gas. We have abundant, cheap natural gas here. So to me, I never actually ran the numbers, but I would save a bit of money on home heating by putting the heat of my black box in my house. But you also got to remember, like we're also paying most of the fees in a gas bill are like distribution and like the transmission of it, and the
Yeah.
actual usage is nothing.
Yeah.
So it doesn't like that's where it's like I consider it a niche, the heat reuse, but it's a good niche, like in the right niches, right? And then like I've always brought this up, and everyone just laughs at me, but like there are potential technology use cases that are not in use today that could be in use in the future. And for example, which are there's a reason they're not in place today, but like you never know what the future holds. And for example, if you think about Bitcoin mining loads and what it's doing to stationary power generation, which we spent most of the time talking about, like optimizing generating stations. Well, most of the world's power isn't stationary, it's portable. It's like automotive, it's cars, it's trains, it's planes. Anywhere you have a moving power plant, you normally have a lot of waste in brake energy, right? Think of a car. And now, like, that's why EVs and stuff are pretty sweet because they can recuperate that brake energy. They can regenerate it into the battery, right? But most of the world doesn't operate on electric. It's on internal combustion engines. So it's more science fiction, but like, when you think about what the future holds, you never really know how technology will develop. And if you could make a Bitcoin mining machine, like the perfect like end system would be weightless, which is not possible, of course, and massless, weightless wouldn't work. But the closer you get to weightless for the same power consumption, the more applicable it is to portable, because now you're not hauling around a heavy load and burning fuel, if you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
you could use it to brake cars, to brake trains, anything you're not recuperating heat, like you're not recuperating energy from brakes. you could do that, and it would be if you had this science fiction reality of weightless uh, computers that are also cheap as hell because it's commoditized. So we'll never get to that perfect system, but maybe we get close enough that it's actually economical to throw this futuristic tiny little like 1 kilogram, 10 kilowatt mining machine integrated into your car, and all of a sudden you're not wasting any money braking your car. You're
Yeah,
monetizing your brakes. And so stuff like that is cool to me. And guys like Drew Bansal, he works for Unchained Capital. He's postulated on some cool aspects of Bitcoin mining that a futuristic civilization could leverage.
sure.
So these are the cool things that like no one would take seriously until it becomes a thing, right? So
Oh, it's really cool. I've not heard that type of. You hear all sorts of cool innovation stuff, but that's new. I like that. That's unique. Um, so just to keep a tab on the time and just kind of a ending question for you, Steve. What, from your opinion, what might be something that the oil and gas guys are missing? If they're not mining Bitcoin right now, what might they be missing, or what would be a good way to help shed some light on why they should be integrating this?
that's a good question. That's sort of the key to me making a lot of sales. you know,
Yeah.
um, the thing I always find it hilarious. Like I even before I got into the Bitcoin mining thing with Upstream Data, I was developing uh, production system improvements for oil and gas companies, like downhole pump improvements, tools, stuff that'll help them make money. And I always found it so crazy. Maybe it's because like I'm more of the creative type, or like to think like I want to try new stuff.
Hmm.
And you find at companies, most people don't want to try new stuff. They just want to just do what they know. That's like my experience. Most people don't want to take, say, personal risk on new stuff. It's one thing to spend the company's money,
Sure.
but actually making the decision is tough for a lot of people. And they got to really, you got to put a lot of mind power into it if it's the right decision. And I think that's part of the problem with this whole Bitcoin mining thing and the adoption in the oil industry or in the upstream generation side of the grid is the difficulty that you just generally see in companies to make those tough decisions that you really have to put a lot more of your mind power on than maybe your typical day to day. So it's a hard decision in that way. And I've seen, like, I have a pump that I designed for a company. Uh, we couldn't get it to sell in the market that it should have sold in. So it was a bear market in the oil patch,
Mm.
and this pump saves you a lot of money. And we proved it. We did some trials on our dime. We proved it, but we couldn't get it to sell. Right? It's like, and it was like, man, I learned a lot of things in that experience because I'm like, this is a good idea. We proved it. They've seen the proof now, the guys that trialed it with us, but they still don't really want to go into it, like buy into it, right? And I
Hmm.
think any company in any nascent industry will sort of come into that like it's some kind of wall before it finally breaks down. And it's been like 6 years, I think, since I designed that pump with this company. And now 6 years later, maybe because the industry's changed a bit, there's a bit more money. It's actually starting to do really well. And it's just this funny thing I've learned trying to innovate in different industries that like you don't get immediate adoption of even really great ideas. And sometimes I sort of feel like, even with this example, this pump thing, a lot of it is they're watching their peers, and when they see their peers using it, that's what gives them the. It's like it gives them the confidence in the decision they need to make to take the risk on it, right? So I think that's what we're going to see. That's why it's really cool when you do see companies like, I mentioned Exxon Mobil. They're just the biggest, oil company in the world. So, and actually, I've met with a lot of their people in Houston and an amazing campus they have there. And they're actually a little outside the box for a big oil company because they actually do a lot of forward thinking risk taking, which is what you'd expect out of a big company. But I can tell you, after working at both sides of the industry, at the oil company and at the service company, most big companies do not want to take risks like this, even when it benefits them the most, which is the crazy part to me. Um, like, because I couldn't get a sale early on and with that pump idea, and it was sort of like me starting Upstream. We had so much trouble getting people to even give us a shot.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear though that like if this works for you, it might not work. You might have to spend 50 grand or maybe 100 grand to do a trial, like that, like big money, but nothing really to them, nothing. And if it does work and it sort of has them on paper, it looks like it should work, then you can scale this across your properties and maybe save tens of millions of dollars, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's that pump thing or some other widget some guy makes. And it's so weird to see but that is what I think we're seeing in the Bitcoin market, is the same mentality you see in every nascent technology. Is the Some people are willing to take the chance, and then eventually everyone follows suit, because they're like, they don't want to miss the party, they don't want to be the loser left behind. And I think that's where we're at. I think
Yeah.
like you see these power companies, like even though that local municipality put their neck out there, like and have risk embarrassing themselves and the decision makers especially, and they're the real pioneers, and they're the ones that are going to drive this technology. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. We definitely need those first adopters to make visible moves. Yeah. Well, Steve, really, really appreciated the conversation today. Would love to, give you a second to, have a handoff, contact information. Where can we point listeners to get in touch with you, Upstream, that sort of stuff?
Sure. I got to stop giving out my personal contact details because I get so many goddamn messages these days. But no, it's a good thing. You can find me on Twitter at SG Barbour. And my website for my company is upstreamdata.com. Um, that you can I'm easy, very easy to contact if you actually want to contact me. Even that Twitter link will get you into my DMs. So um, yeah, feel free anytime. And thanks for the time, Ben. I appreciate the opportunity to preach the gospel of Satoshi, man. Thank you.
Yeah, this was awesome, Steve. Thank you. Appreciate it. Take care.
No worries. Take care.